The Donner Party, a nightmare beyond survival. The winter of 1846 would become a testament to the darkest depths of human survival, a story so horrifying that it would haunt the American frontier for generations. The Donner Party was not just a tragic expedition, but a descent into a nightmare that would blur the lines between humanity and something far more primal and terrifying. The journey began with hope and ambition. Kirk, a group of 87 settlers from Illinois, led by George Donner and James F. Reed, set out on a journey that would become one of the most infamous migrations in American history. They were part of the great westward expansion, driven by the promise of new land, new opportunities, and the American dream. Their route was experimental. The newly proposed Hastings Cutoff, a supposed shortcut across the Great Salt Lake Desert that promised to save hundreds of miles from the traditional Oregon Trail. The man who proposed this route, Lansford Hastings, was a promoter, a dreamer who had never personally traversed the path he was recommending. His guidebook, The Emigrant's Guide to Oregon and California, would become a document of false promises and deadly miscalculations. The group departed Springfield, Illinois. In April 1846, they were a diverse collection of families, individuals with different backgrounds but united by a common dream. The Reed family, the Murphy family, the Brienne family, each had their own stories, their own hopes. They brought with them everything they owned: farming tools, household items, provisions, and an unbreakable spirit of adventure. But the Hastings Cutoff was not a shortcut. It was a nightmare. The desert crossing was brutal. What was supposed to be a simple passage turned into a grueling, month-long ordeal. Wagons became stuck in the salt marshes. Oxen died from exhaustion and lack of water. They lost precious weeks, weeks that would prove fatal when winter approached. By the time they reached the Sierra Nevada mountains, it was already late October. The first snows were beginning to fall. Normally, wagon trains would have already crossed the mountains, but the Donner Party was weeks behind schedule, their progress drastically slowed by the disastrous cutoff. The mountains were unforgiving. Snow began to fall heavily, trapping the party in what would become known as Truckee Lake, now called Donner Lake. They constructed makeshift cabins, desperate shelters against the mounting winter. Two separate camps formed, one at the lake, another a few miles away at what would be called Alder Creek. As days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, the situation became increasingly desperate. Food supplies dwindled. The snow continued to fall, creating massive drifts that made escape impossible. They were not just trapped, they were entombed by nature itself. Hunting became impossible. The snow was too deep. Animals were scarce, clipped hair. Livestock had been consumed early in their entrapment. Rats and mice became precious sources of nutrition, but soon, even those ran out. It was during these dark weeks that something changed within the group. The line between survival and savagery began to blur. The first rumors of cannibalism started quietly, whispered between those who were too weak to speak loudly. When food completely ran out, some members of the party made a horrifying decision. They would consume the flesh of those who had already died. Luis and Salvador, two Native American hunters hired by the group, were among the first to be killed and consumed. But this was just the beginning. As more died from cold, starvation, and disease, more bodies became potential food sources. Patrick Breen, who kept a detailed diary during this time, documented the descent into this nightmare. His entries became increasingly dark, detailing not just their physical struggle, but the psychological breakdown of the group. Rescue attempts were made, but the snow made progress nearly impossible. The first relief party reached the camps in February 1847, finding a scene of unimaginable horror: makeshift shelters, frozen bodies, evidence of cannibalism everywhere. Of the 87 original members of the Donner Party, only 48 would survive, but survival came at a cost that went beyond physical suffering. Local Native American tribes spoke of a darker element to the story. They believed that something supernatural had cursed the expedition. Some argued that the spirits of the mountains had been angered by the intrusion of these settlers, that the extreme winter was not just a meteorological event, but a form of supernatural retribution. Shamanic traditions told of ancient guardians of the Sierra Nevada, spirits that protected the land from outsiders. These were not simple folklore, but deeply held spiritual beliefs passed down through generations. They spoke of entities that could control weather, that could create storms as a form of punishment. The survivors told stories that went beyond simple survival, accounts of hearing voices in the wind, shadows that moved between the trees, whispers that seemed to come from the frozen ground itself. Many spoke of feeling watched, not just by the living, but by something else. Psychological studies conducted decades later suggested that the survivors suffered from a form of collective trauma, but those who were there knew it was something more, something that couldn't be explained by science or rational thought. The land itself seemed to remember. Even today, hikers and researchers in the Donner Lake area report unexplained phenomena: temperature drops, sudden mists, the feeling of being watched, electronic equipment malfunctioning for no apparent reason. Historians have documented the story. Researchers have analyzed every aspect of the expedition, but something remains unresolved. Something that exists in the space between historical fact and supernatural mystery. The Donner Party was more than a tragic expedition. It was a threshold moment where human survival intersected with something darker. A testament to the lengths humanity will go to survive, and the price paid when those boundaries are crossed. In the silent, snow-covered mountains, something still waits, remembering, watching, waiting for those who would dare to uncover its full, terrifying truth.